August 1940. Estonia had just been erased from the map. A law professor walks into a museum and stole the national flag. Not to keep it, to save it. 4 years later, a 14-year-old boy climbed a palace flagpole and took down the Estonian presidential flag. They almost certainly never met. They were saving two different flags in two different ways, but somehow independently they had arrived at the same conclusion. This needs to survive. And I think that's what I keep coming back to, because neither of them caused the war, neither of them controlled what happened to Estonia, and yet a professor and a child both ended up carrying something that much larger powers were trying to take away. One flag was buried beneath a fireplace, the other was carried on a boy's body under his coat across a border. And decades later, both of them ended up in the same room.
Which is partly why I've come to Estonia, but we'll get to that. Before any of this happened, the blue-black-white was something much smaller. It began as a student colours, not a government symbol, not a state decree, just three colours chosen by young Estonians in the 1880s, at a time when Estonia wasn't an independent country at all. It was part of the Russian Empire, which meant that even choosing your own colours could feel quite significant. Blue, black, white. Blue for the sky and sea, black for the soil and hardship, white for hope. It's tempting to read all sorts of historical density into a combination now, but I doubt the students were trying to design a future national symbol. They just wanted something that felt like theirs, something that said, this represents us as Estonians. Nobody sits down and says, right, let's create a national symbol, because that would be unbearable. Very committee, very font debated, very, can we make the black slightly more meaningful? No. It starts smaller than that. A few people choose something that feels like theirs, then history gets hold of it. The first blue-black-white flag was consecrated on the 4th of June 1884 in a rectory in a small town called Otepää. 16 students and 6 alumni, they had to travel there in secret. That date is now Estonia's Flag Day. In 1918, Estonia became independent. The student colours became the national flag. It was flown openly recognised, just part of normal life, which sounds like the end of the story. And briefly, it was. But normality has a habit of feeling permanent right up until it isn't. June 1940, Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union. The blue-black-white was banned, not discouraged, not quietly frowned upon, banned. Ownership became a criminal offence, the flag was confiscated from homes, people who kept them were arrested. And this is worth sitting with for just a moment, because an occupying power with soldiers, prisons, documents, borders and all the machinery of the state still had to worry about a piece of cloth. That level of urgency tells you something about what a flag actually is. By 1940, the original 1884 student flag had been placed in the Estonian National Museum. Not this one, this is a more modern building. But it was safe, you might think. But museums only protect history when history is allowed to exist. Under occupation, a museum can become something else. A list of things to remove, a list of things to rename, a list of things to deny. And Karl Aun understood that. Aun was not a soldier, he was not a revolutionary in a dramatic coat-flapping sense, he was a law professor, an academic, the sort of person you can imagine caring about records, institutions, procedures, which is exactly why this story intrigues me. In August 1940, Aun and a small group connected with the Estonian Student Society walked into the museum. They removed the original 1884 flag. They replaced it with a replica made in 1934 for the flag's 50th anniversary. Then they took the real flag away. So technically, yes, a professor stole a flag from a museum, which is not a sentence you hear all that often. But he wasn't stealing it to possess it. He was stealing it because leaving it there was more dangerous than taking it. The real flag was packed into containers and buried in the woods near Viljandi. The Soviets never realised the switch had actually happened. I keep coming back to how that decision must have felt, because this wasn't a grand heroic moment. It was careful, it was planned, it was practical, almost administrative. Aun and the others looked at the situation and understood what was going on. If the flag remained visible, it might not survive. So they made it invisible. Not forever, they probably thought anyway, just for now, just until this had all passed and all blown over. But history, being history, was about to be spectacularly unhelpful. 4 years later, Estonia was in another terrible gap between empires. The Germans were retreating, the Soviets were advancing. And in that narrow window, Estonia made one final attempt to restore its lawful government. Otto Tief became acting Prime Minister on the 18th of September 1944. His government lasted 4 days. Just 4 days. They declared the restoration of the Republic of Estonia. They tried to assert continuity. They tried to show that Estonia had not simply vanished into someone else's war. Then Soviet forces entered Tallinn. Most of Tief's cabinet were arrested. Several would die in Soviet captivity. Tief himself spent years in the Gulag. So when we talk about a flag being taken down from the Kadriorg Palace behind me, the seat of Estonia's head of state, it isn't just a dramatic visual. It's happening at the exact moment a country's legal government is collapsing. And the person who took down that flag was 14-year-old Eugene Wilder. According to the family account, Wilder climbed the palace flagpole alongside an Estonian soldier and removed the presidential flag before the Soviet forces reached the building. Then his mother took Eugene and his younger sister west as refugees. His mother was trying to get her children out alive, and somehow wrapped around one of them was the country's flag. And as the family passed through border controls, according to the same account, Eugene wrapped the flag around his body beneath the clothes. Just pause for a moment. A child, a border crossing, a presidential flag hidden under his clothing. This is not somebody who caused the war. This is not somebody directing armies or signing treaties. This is a boy being pulled through history by a decision made far above his head, and yet somehow he becomes responsible for this object. The flag travelled with him through Germany to Australia in 1949, where it stayed, not in a museum, not in a display case, just kept quiet in a house in a small village called Cowan, north of Sydney, for the rest of a long and ordinary life. Wilder died on the 20th of January 2022. He was 91. His nephews, Andreas and Thomas Wilder, found the flag while going through his belongings. So by the late 1940s, there are now 2 Estonian flags living 2 completely different secret lives. One in Estonia, buried. The other is in Australia, carried into exile by a boy who became a man, then an old man, without the flag ever going home. One survives by staying, the other survives by leaving. Carl Owen is an adult, a professor, a man trained in institutions. Eugene Wilder is 14. He barely has any say over what happens to him. But both of them are responding to the same instinct, that if these flags fall into the wrong hands, something more than cloth will be lost. And neither of them can know whether Estonia is ever coming back. That's easy to forget now. We know the ending. They didn't. From where they stood, the Soviet Union did not look temporary. It looked enormous, permanent, unarguable. So when Aun buries the original flag, he's not doing it with neat historical countdown running in his head. Don't worry, Carl, 51 years and you'll be all sorted. No, he's making a decision in the dark. So is Wilder. Different flag, different place, same instinct. This should not disappear. The first hiding place wasn't enough. A burial in the woods might protect something for a few months, but in 1942 it was becoming clear that this was not a temporary interruption. The crisis was changing shape, so Aun and the others dug the flag back up. They wrapped it in oiled cloth, they used asbestos, they placed it inside a steel box and welded it shut. Then Aun took it to his family farm near Valmastvere, and here the story becomes almost oddly domestic. His grandmother had apparently been asking for a second fireplace for years, which in most families would be a fairly normal household request. A bit of warmth, a practical improvement, nothing dramatic. On the 28th of April 1944, Aun placed the container beneath the hearth of that new fireplace. The fireplace was built over it. The floor was levelled, the original blue, black, white disappeared into the structure of ordinary life. There was no grand marker, no guard, no heroic plaque that reads, "Extremely illegal national symbol hidden here. Please do not inform Moscow." Just a fireplace, a farmhouse, a family. Only Carl Aun and his father knew the exact location. Then Aun fled west before the Soviets returned. Eventually he ended up in Canada, where he spent the rest of his academic career. And for almost 50 years, the location of the original Estonian flag stayed in his head. That is an odd thing to carry, not the flag itself, the knowledge, the responsibility, the quiet worry that perhaps one day it would be needed, or perhaps one day it would be too late. For most people, memory fades because life moves on. For Aun, remembering was the job. At this point, it would be very easy to describe both stories simply as bravery. And they are, of course they are. A professor risking everything to hide a banned national symbol. A 14-year-old boy taking down a flag from a palace as the Soviets advance. Bravery is the obvious word, but I don't think it's the most precise one. Because what they were preserving wasn't only a symbol, it was evidence. Evidence that Estonia had existed before Soviet occupation. Evidence that Estonia identity had not been invented later as nostalgia. Evidence that had been institutions, laws, students, ceremonies, governments, people who understood themselves as Estonian long before anyone tried to tell them otherwise. That's why flags are dangerous in occupied countries. Not because they're magic, not because the cloth has any supernatural powers. Annoying really, if it did then vexillology would be funded much better than it is. Flags are dangerous because they contradict the official story. And the official Soviet story was not simply we control Estonia, it was Estonia chose this. Estonia was liberated. Estonia was never really separate in the way that you claim. So a flag becomes a problem. The original 1884 flag says this existed before you. The Kadroig's presidential flag says this government tried to stand before you returned. A replica can remember, an original can testify, and that is the difference. The Soviets understood that. It's why they banned the flag immediately. It's why they didn't just take flags down, they destroyed them, arrested people who had them, tried to erase them from memory. They were trying to eliminate the evidence. Aun and Vilde were trying to preserve it. Maybe not in those exact words, probably not in fact, but enough to know that this should not be left behind. And then comes the part of both stories that is hardest to dramatise. Waiting. Because after the dramatic acts, after the museum switch, after the flagpole, after the border crossings, nothing much happens. Not visibly. The flags simply remain hidden. One beneath a fireplace, one in Australia. Years pass, then decades. Stalin dies, the Cold War hardens, the Berlin Wall is built, the Berlin Wall falls, people grow older, families move, new lives form around old absences. And I think this is the part of both stories that's more affecting than the usual wartime hero narrative, because most of it isn't action, it's restraint, keeping quiet, not showing people, not turning it into a family anecdote, just keeping it safe, which frankly is the opposite of how most of us behave when we have anything slightly interesting to tell everybody. I once told the family that I found my old school report. So keeping a presidential flag quiet for decades does suggest a certain level of self-control. And that's the point. The heroism here is not loud, it is almost boring from the outside, which is probably why it worked. In the late 1980s, Estonia began to move again. The blue, black, white returned to public life during the singing revolution. On the 24th of February 1989, it raised once more over the Pick Herman Tower just behind me. And in August 1991, Estonia restored its independence. Aun still waited, which tells you something about what occupation does to people. Even when independence had returned, he didn't immediately assume it was safe. History had already reversed itself once, why trust it straight away? But on the 26th of December 1991, the original flag was finally dug up. The process was recorded on camera. When the footage aired on Estonian television on Independence Day, 24th of February 1992, people watched the original blue, black, white emerge from beneath the fireplace for the first time in half a century. Not a copy, the real one, the object that had been consecrated in 1884, the flag that had begun with students, the flag that had been hidden by a professor, the flag that had outlasted the regime that tried to take it. And then, many years later, the second flag surfaced. In March 2026, more than 80 years after it left Estonia, the presidential flag was handed in Sydney to Estonia's foreign minister. Then it came home. On the 4th of June 2026, Estonia's Flag Day, that's today for me, the Estonian National Museum in Tartu brought both flags together, the buried flag and the exiled flag, two completely different journeys through the same century, ending in the same room. This is the presidential flag that Eugene stole, the very one, been to Australia and back. And this is the very first 1888 national flag of Estonia that was stolen, buried, dug up, buried under a fireplace, and is now here at the National Museum. For a flag enthusiast, this is rather exciting. I've been talking about flags for years, but being here, knowing what these two flags survived, it feels different. Being here outside the Estonian National Museum, it would be easy to treat this as a neat ending. The flag survived, they came home, they're together, history resolved. Lovely. But I don't think that's quite what this is, because these stories are not neat, they're not reassuring, they're beautiful and impressive, yes, but they're also deeply unfair. A law professor should not have to steal from a museum to preserve a country's memory. A 14-year-old boy should not have to hide presidential flags beneath his clothes while fleeing his home country. These are not people who caused the war, they are people the war happened to. And yet, when the moment came, they protected something that should never have needed protecting in the first place. As for the flag, it is, to be fair, an excellent flag. Simple, distinctive, 3 clear stripes, no seal, well, not the national one anyway, no tiny animals doing heroic things in the corners. It's a sensible flag, and I like those. But the reason I love it more now is because of what it carries, because this flag didn't survive through laws and ceremonies alone, it survived through people. Students choosing colours before they had a country, a professor hiding the first flag under a fireplace, a boy carrying another into exile, families keeping secrets, museums preserving what came back. And now, just for a short time until October 2026, the flags are here, not as decoration, not as patriotic wallpaper, but as witnesses. One stayed, one left, both returned, and somewhere between them, a country waited. Be seeing you.